So where else do you want to go?
Well, I think we can talk about XTC all day, but I'm really fascinated by other aspects of your work. And,
okay.
And, you know, I just had to bring up that we recently lost Harold Budd.
Yes, that's a shame. I thought he was the kind of person that'd never go, you know, and never, because he was always emailing me. He'd find a photograph he liked and he'd email me, or he'd hear a joke and email me that, or a little piece of film or something. I loved working with Harold. It was very, I know he hated the ambient term because he was an old jazzer and he just thought of himself as being kind of a minimalist.
That makes sense. Jazz.
Yeah. He thought that ambient was a bit too wallpaper. It was a bit too, this is in the background and you're not to pay any heed to it. And I kind of agree. To me, ambient is, you know, you can play a Black Sabbath album, turn it down low enough and you've got ambient. It's all to do with in the case of ambient music, the kind of, I don't know, I never took to it, and he absolutely abhorred it. In any interviews, if anyone said Harold as an ambient artist, he'd really cringe, you know. And he and I would have great email, or originally fax, and then we got into email. Great stuff, you know. He asked me to come up with all the titles for that album, for the tracks.
Good titles, yeah, good titles.
And I came up with, and I knew he had this kind of penchant for architectural or archaeological terms. So I still have notebooks full of hundreds of reject titles and things from that project.
Can I tell you my favorite?
Go on, which one?
Great Valley of Gongs.
Oh yes, and we had to have a gong on it. Damn it, we just had to be literal.
But there's gong sounding, like sort of the whooshing thing on it that's so beautiful.
Yeah,
it's almost like the essence of gongs, and also just cast out into a huge environment. Which is the thing I guess I wanted to compliment you guys about was, you know, the short snapshot vignette thing goes against the core of minimalism. Well, maybe not in a different way of minimalism, because it is it's minimal like Webern's minimal. But also the idea of the snapshot or the vignette, which is something that I'd seen you concerned with in other elements of your work with Mr. Partridge, Takeaway, and the little Homo Safari pieces, you know, these Somnambulist, these sort of little mood pieces, I call them, or vignettes. I love that about your work.
A lot of those come from kind of poetry, I guess. Just I write stuff and then I don't know what I'm going to do with it. You know, I'll write things and I think, is that going to be a lyric? I don't know. Don't worry about it. Sometimes I'll just write, just to literally, I need to purge myself. And I start writing and I try not to have any expectations of what's going to come out. It might just come out as cunt, 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 but I have to write it. Or it'll come out as you know, pages and pages of stuff that doesn't make sense. And then you can see it coalescing into something sensible in the middle before it breaks away again. And you can just hone in on those 8 lines and you think, shit, that is a great lyric. I'm going to use that. But I didn't know it was in there. If I hadn't gone into kind of that ghost writing mode, you know, when you suspend your wrist and you tape a pen in your hand and you go to sleep and, you know, you wake up and you find you've drawn something or written something.
Automatic writing.
Yeah, Peter Blegvad was big on that. He would sleep with his hand in a like a suspended kind of bandage thing with a pencil taped in his fingers and a piece of blank paper. And as he was falling asleep, you know, and in the morning he'd see if he'd written or drawn anything. And that's some of my lyrical things come from that. The lyrics to to Summer's Cauldron came from just being sat in the back garden one hot day, just writing gibberish, not knowing where it was going. And the same with the lyrics that became Mermaid Smile.
Well, I have to say, Mermaid Smile, I'm so glad you mentioned it. It just puts me there every time. In fact, I have to listen to it sparingly because I could end up sobbing while I listen to it.
Yeah, it's a painful song because it's that thing you realize you can't get back to that child again.
Oh my God, it's brutal. And of course, the sea thing is huge for me and my family. And so all of that, New Jersey Shore, you know.
Well, it came from writing about a book I loved as a child, which was, it was only a little book about this size, but right in the center of it was cut through all the boards of the book was a hole. Then on the back page was glued a thick, clear plastic bag of water. I can't remember whether it had any plastic fish in it, little plastic fish, but it was a little bag, like a little dome of water, taped on the back page. And as you opened each page, there was another scene, like a cave on the bottom of the sea, or a porthole of a submarine, or something, you know, a mermaid going like this, and you're looking through her fingers or something, you know. And I love that book as a kid. And I wanted to try and write, not thinking it was going to be a song, but write something about how much I love that book. And it was initially, I think the poem was titled Book Full of Sea. Yeah, getting all emotional thinking about it. Yeah.
Are you able to find the fingering on this current guitar you're sitting next to?
Well, it's a different tuning.
Yeah.
Which is, and a lot of my songs are unusual tunings because that's how you trick your brain into creativity. Because if you just sit down, it comes out as. But if that's in a different tuning and it comes out as. You know, that's much more interesting. But it's based around D6. But I think there's one of the notes is, or two of the strings are tuned down, and I can't remember. I've got it written in an exercise book somewhere. But that's one of the tricks to fool your own brain into creativity. The Big Express album is mostly open E tuning.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's how you fool your head into. Because you just know you're in danger of throwing the same shapes on. And so to trick yourself, you make it so that you throw that shape on and it comes out sounding totally different. Like the song This World Over is the chords to Complicated Game, but played on an open E tuning. So they come out totally different.
Wow.
But that's how I blundered into it. I thought, shit, I wonder what Complicated Game, which was, you know, just, what was it? But if you tune the guitar to an open E and play those, it's the basis of This World Over. So it's how you fool yourself. It's how you can trick your own psyche into going to wrong places, because creativity is getting things wrong. People are asking me all the time, Andy, how do you create? Well, I say, make mistakes, make errors.
Also, fuck with the shit that you know. So you were doing what you're doing there was you were fucking with a basic premise to come up with more material, to mine more material out of a basic premise.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how you do it. It's like, how can I paint a different picture? Well, just use one color. What? No other colors? No, just use red. Okay, you'll be thinking differently. How do I paint? Okay, I did one just using red. How do I do a different one now? Okay, I paint one with a blindfold on. Paint one on a bumpy 3-dimensional surface. Oh, it was really tough, but you know, that's how you fool you've got to do things you've got to purposefully make mistakes. You've got to fuck up. If you don't fuck up, you will never have any originality. You will never invent anything.
Well, also anybody can do it.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. But it's recognizing it. You've got to say, hey, that's wrong, and it's really right.
Do you have moments in the studio with XTC where that happened?
Not very often, because we were always ultra aware of how much money we were paying for that studio. You know, when there's a big round thing on the wall that's going £100, £200, £300,
so like the pipe on Towers of London, that's already in pre-pro in your mind?
I wanted shorthand for industry. I wanted you to think of men with hammers hitting in rivets.
No, I know you do. It's incredibly visual, but I'm wondering, like, was that part of the original demo idea, or does that happen in spontaneity in the studio? Let's get the sound.
Some things were spontaneous. I'm trying to think what things were spontaneous. Respectable Street with the
opening.
Like an old 78.
Great.
That's actually a test pressing of a Peter Gabriel album, which Steve Lillywhite had this delivered to the Townhouse Studios. I'll get this water in a minute. He had a test pressing delivered. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we could really make it sound like a 78, really make it sound thin and narrow sounding, you know.
Coming through a horn, yeah.
Like all down a horn, yeah. And I said, but we need some scratches. And this was not the day of just dialing up samples. So we had to make some scratches, and nobody had any records. So Steve Lillywhite said, well, I've got one. It's the new Peter Gabriel album, the test pressing. It's like, okay, give it to us. And like, you know, took a screwdriver or whatever it was and fucked up the run out groove or the run in groove, whichever, a little bit of blank space.
Yeah, the blank.
Put the stylus on and, you know.
Early sampling.
So it's that's the scratchy, messed up start of Respectable Street is a Peter Gabriel test pressing. But that's, you know, mother of invention, necessity, you know.
But that's, you know, you touch on a very interesting nexus there, Andy Partridge. I'm fascinated by this idea of all those bands towards the end of the 70s that embraced this idea of no cymbals, or a kind of minimized use of cymbals, so that it was really about drums. And here's where I was thinking this was happening. This was happening on the Peter Gabriel stuff. This was happening on moments on drums and wires, but certainly Travels in Nylon,
yeah, named after the Alan Silito book.
Right on. And then this is happening with Kate Bush, and then this is happening with King Crimson in Discipline. So
right. Well, certainly a lot of those shared the same engineers.
And I wonder, though, did this not start with XTC?
Well, I can tell you my timeline of how we came to that sound. We did the first 2 albums with John Leckie, who is one of my favorite people I have ever been in a studio with.
He's amazing.
You should really talk to him if you haven't.
I would love to have it.
I can make that happen.
Please, sir.
Don't worry. I send it like some sinister gangland. I can make this happen. Don't worry.
Thank you, Godfather. You're so good to me.
So yeah, my timeline was, or XTC's timeline was, we did the first 2 albums with John, and he's immaculate in the studio. He sets up great microphone. He works great compression, great reverbs, and he takes a sonic photograph of what you're doing.
Yes.
Basically, you play live. You play your live set, and he tapes it and then mixes it. And that's how we did White Music and Go To. There was little in the way of overdubs certainly on the first record, but on the second one, the overdubs were pretty minimal. some of them were accidental. You say about accidental things in the studio. I got up and we were doing Life is Good in the Greenhouse in Abbey Road, Studio 3, the littler one. And I stood up and I hit my head on a hanging lamp that was hanging over my chair. It was like a, you know, like a sort of gooseneck type lamp with a big metal shade on it. And I didn't twig how low it was above my head. And I stood up and it bong, like this. Ow, what a great sound. And so it got used in the, ever wonder how I look so fresh? Bong, bong. That's two lamps from Abbey Road Studio 3. One I hit my head on, which was just in the same key as the bong, and the other one, the bong bong da da. I think it's the relative da 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 da. Yeah, there we go. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I hit my head on the lamp, so it was, Christ, we got to get these lamps in that track. They're so nice, the relative thing to the key, you know. But no, we can. But John, I was hearing something more primitive. I was hearing the drums being more primal, and what I had in my head. We said to Virgin, we'd really like a producer who can make the drums more primal. And they said, well, what do you think to Steve Lillywhite? He just produced this track by Susie and the Banshees. And I can't remember what track it was, but I thought, yes, that more explosive drum sound. How do you get that? Because what I wanted, I used to take this to people and say, I want the drums to sound like the 2 beats on the intro of Jailhouse Rock, Elvis Presley.
Oh, okay.
Bam, bam, bang, bang, bam, bam, bang, bang. And they are obviously done in a sizable room, or they have sizable reverb on them.
Or your center plate or something like that.
Yeah, and the mics don't sound too close to the kit. They sound like they're setting the space off. And I didn't know that at that time, that the drums can interact with the space, because we're talking, you know, my only experience of studios or demo studios was everything has got brown carpet 3 inches thick on it.
Yeah, or Kotex, yeah.
Yeah. So the floor's got brown carpet, the walls have brown carpet, the ceilings are brown carpet. You're in a brown carpet womb.
And then the drums have tape on the heads.
Yes, and they all sound the same. Whoop, 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 whoop. And the cymbals too. Whoop. But it's all what. Well,
can I just say then, as a sidebar, thank you, because, you know, I point to this all the time in production courses where that's a liberation in the music.
It was.
Because here's the downside of listening to the jazz fusion stuff that we all love is the drum sounds usually are terrible. If you get Cobham on Birds of Fire, that's a really good Ken Scott drum sound. But generally speaking, they're like Harvey Mason, super dry, you know, Lenny White, pretty dry. So there's this whole dry obsession. And as a drummer,
it came out of funk, didn't it?
Yes. So it's much more about funk, R&B.
It came out of the nattering small. You can't do funk with an open sound because you end up with Tony Williams.
Correct. So now you're identifying the key element that I talk about all the time, which is, do you want an open sound or do you want a dry sound? Because it depends on the genre. It depends on the musical content. Is it going to work with the overall content of the rhythmic flow? Now, your music that you're making at that point is so big and it's trying to get bigger, and that everything has to open up. So in a way, that's the search for the great bass sound that you've searched for can't be done without the search for the great drum sound that you're going for.
Well, the drum, like I said, the timeline came with me wanting the drums to sound like the intro of Jailhouse Rock, and that not happening on the first 2 albums. So speaking to Steve Lillywhite, I said, well, how did you do the drums on this Susie and the Banshees record? Because that's closer to what I have in my head that we should be sounding like with this intro of Jailhouse Rock.
Now, is that pre-Stone Room?
I think it is, but he said they recorded the drums quite ambiently, but he said because he was not a great drummer, whoever the drummer was, it wasn't Budgie at the time, it was somebody else. He said he had to record the drums all separately. So he'd do a pass with just his foot, and a pass with just his snare drum, and a pass with just any tom-toms or whatever it was. So and with that, he said he had the luxury of being able to open up the room a bit more, and it sounded more exciting. And then we worked with Hugh Padgham, who was Lillywhite's engineer. They kind of came as a team at the time. And Hugh was working on this thing. We did Life Begins at the Hop with them, and we were thinking, yeah, this has got the sound we want. The drums are really snarling. It's like Tamla, but metallic Tamla. And it's bam, 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 boom, bam, boom, bam, bam. And that was really exciting. But Hugh Padgham himself says it came from the fact that no cymbals came from the fact that you could get a really big drum sound where the room is integral to it, and you can gate it off if you want to chop it off. So it goes, or leave it to go. But as soon as you put cymbals or hi-hat into that mix, that fucks the gate up totally. It spills. You can't have all those ultra highs on the toms, so you can hear the texture of the skin and everything. As soon as you put cymbals of any description into that blend, it spoils this high fidelity 23rd century primitive thing of the drums. So that's where that sound came from. It came through Jailhouse Rock, Susie and the Banshees, because the drummer wasn't any good. Steve Lillywhite, Hugh Padgham's engineering and gating. And then it got picked up by Gabriel. Then it came back to us with more of the Gabriel tricks they learned. And then it went on to Gabriel again and other people. So it was going backwards and forwards between us. And those two fellas were tweaking this sound, really making the sound of the early 80s.
And it's so impressive in its confrontational nature. So, the drum fill that Phil Collins plays on No Self-Control. I mean, that all of that stuff where it's like, oh my God, that drum is in my face. And I always felt like Travels had really kind of the drums overdriven.
Yes. Plus the essence of Terry, which was Terry is not a musician. You program Terry. You can ask him to play the most outlandish thing. And because he's not a musician, he doesn't overthink it. You can ask him to play unusual things, things that are upside down, things that are like drums being inside out, like the Making Plans for Nigel rhythm is a basic rhythm just turned inside out on the wrong drums. The hi-hat parts on the tom-tom, the snare drum part is something else. Maybe that's the bass drum. It's all messed up. And it would be the same with whatever complex pattern you asked him to play, whether it be It's Nearly Africa or Travels in Nihilon or Melt the Guns. He'd get these unusual rhythms. You'd explain to him what you wanted, and it would kind of work out the same every time. He'd say, okay, you lot fuck off for about 15 minutes. Give me 15 minutes to learn this fucker. Then I'll fucking give you the signal and you can come back in and we'll do it. So you'd hear him wrestling with programming himself to play this ludicrous thing. And then, you know, after a quarter of an hour, he'd come out for a cigarette. Right, I think I got the fucker licked now. And you go, and he'd be like perfect with it. And he's playing this, but because he's not a musician, I mean, he never knew how to tune his drums. As long as they felt tight enough, that would do, you know. But he had this naive ability, this like a naive genius or something, you know. You just had to go with what Terry did. Was you could program him with the most outlandish stuff. He'd have to learn it, and sometimes the other players would put him off. Sometimes we cut tracks, just me and him. He'd instruct Dave and Colin to go in the control room. I just want to cut this with parto. So it'd be my rhythm part locking with this rhythm that he's doing.
Which is counter to what Colin would want, because he wants to track with the drums, no?
Colin would mostly track with the drums, but sometimes if the part demanded a kind of a trance state out of Terry, then he would sometimes banish. He would insist on doing it with just me and him.
Did Colin come up with the sliding bass machine thing on Rhodes Girdle?
Yeah, that's totally his line.
That's the boo.
He came up with 95% of all the bass lines he played, and sometimes I'd give him things that were difficult. Like I presented him. Green Man already had orchestral basses. He had a couple of uprights on there, doing these very low things. So he couldn't go down that end. He had to go up the dusty end, up in the attic, you know. So he came up with this great sort of tenor barking kind of line, which sat totally away from the low. It was almost like that kind of Beach Boys thing where you have a low upright and then you have an echoey, barky, clicky thing an octave away, you know. But so sometimes I'd throw him tough stuff. And then I think the toughest thing I ever threw him was I said it's integral to the arrangement of the song. He had to learn the bass line for Mayor of Simpleton, which is very tricky.
Yeah, it comes to time where that's part of the spine of the song, and you need that to drive the song. And I'm sure he was receptive to that.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a piece of Cod Bach or something, you know, the bass line is
obbligato, ostinato, whatever you want to call it. It's definitely
it weaves through that. It's the fabric of that song.
And it's a little snaky in there, and that's nice.
Yeah. So the poor bugger had to play that, you know, but usually left to his own devices. His bass lines were immaculate melodic things, but he never failed to hit what needed hitting when it needed hitting, you know.
Well, you know, you're in an area before we go to another area, and because I really want to talk to you about powers, but this
yes.
I have, and I wonder if you could please give me your take. But in this area that we're talking about, I feel like XTC is really having an impact on these other bands. And now here's the thing. First of all, you're all traveling in the same orbit. That's one thing. Second of all, it's a kind of culture develops around this because you're hearing each other's stuff, you're touring, whatever. You're just aware. I'm not saying people are ripping people off, but I'm saying people are aware. XTC, man, the way those guys play together, we better get some of that. We better be aware of that. These albums are coming out 79, 80. I mean, and there are people that are in before that. Like I think Pat knew you guys from the beginning. So, I mean, there was already a culture, and all the guys that I work with, Keneally and with him, Doug Lunn, the late great Doug Lunn, it was a consensus that you'd better be on top of this XTC stuff. Oh, the next XTC thing is coming out by like the second or third, fourth record, because musicians are that. Let's face it, musicians are going to be the first people that are going to get XTC. It could be.
I guess so. You know, I never used to think we were making music for musicians.
No, you didn't, obviously, but there's something in there that's so appealing to us because you know what, Andy? Everybody in the band's treated equally. all the parts are treated. You want to be a drummer? Listen to XTC. You want to be a bass player? Listen to XTC. You want to be a singer writing harmonies? You want to be a guitar player playing in a band with another guitar player? So all this stuff is incredibly rich for us. And so these are the people that are, you got Murata being influenced by Terry Chambers. You have Bruford, who in Musician magazine of its day is said to have a cassette, quote, cassette of drums and wires in his car as they're driving to the
He offered to drum on one of our albums. I can't remember which one it was now, but I think we all felt scared. We've had some great people. We've had some great people offer to drum on our records, one of them being Tony Williams.
Yeah, of course. Well, you know, that's what I'm saying. Does this not make my point for me, though? Like, the drummers know XTC's got some fucking amazing drum parts. You better go check that shit out. Oh, you like rock music? Oh, you should check out this drummer on XTC. And so you get to the point where Fripp takes the bass player from Peter Gabriel, and he's got Bruford, but he's telling him no cymbals. He's telling Bruford no cymbals, by the way. He's not having Bruford go, yeah, let's do the no cymbal thing. I remember this controversy as if it were yesterday. I was just going into college, and they played at my college gymnasium on that first tour in New Jersey. Okay, so he's got the bass player from Peter Gabriel and everything else, and then he gets the guitar player from the Talking Heads. Then Fripp is coming from a band with the keyboardist from XTC.
Yes, a League of Gentlemen, yeah.
So your thoughts on all of this?
I can cast no gloom on Robert Fripp at all.
No, not gloom. I'm just saying, isn't the impact irrefutable?
I guess so. I hadn't thought of it casting the net that wide.
You did.
I'm a little bit speechless. I have to think this through.
Look at my work, look at my math, and look at the timeline. And I just think by the time you get to 82, which is what we're talking about, that he's thought it through, and he's going to get a guitar player that he can do intertwining guitar parts with, because if you wanted that shit, you better be checking out XTC. And, you know, he wanted a strong bass player, and he had his strong drummer, but that drummer wasn't going to be allowed to have a hi-hat, for fuck's sake.
Do you know, I'd never thought about this, and now you've pointed this out. That's going to be my evening, is going to be me pondering this question there.
And I would just say it should at least tickle you.
We thought it was weirdly incongruous that Barry Andrews should get together with another balding Les Paul player who was known to be rather dominating when he just got out of a band with one.
Interesting, right?
Yeah. And
I've heard the stuff, and it makes sense again.
I guess so. Yeah. Wow. I just want to. Yeah. I'm seriously. I'm going to have to think that through. That's a real. That's slippery. That's slippery ice.
Can I tell you some little other things if you want me to get a little too geeky on this, and then I'll stop. Tell me to stop.
If you like, because I've got that. I'm going to have to chew that one.
What's the fucking difference in the common person's ear between your singing and Adrian's style of singing? It's ballpark. It's
pretty close, actually.
So
it's pretty close. Do you know how I got my style of singing? I thought, we're only going to get one shot at this. I got to be memorable. Let me stick all of the bits that I consider to be memorable singing together in one stew. I'm going to have Buddy Holly's hiccup, which sounds great with slapback echo, like on that sort of stuff. So I'm going to have a dollop of that. I'm going to have Steve Harley's howl, kind of thing. Couple of other bits from other people. Because of shit PA systems, you can't sing E sounds. E's turn into nothing. You can't sing E, that becomes nothing. But you can sing oh, and that becomes the loudest sound in the universe.
Or so, even is better.
Yeah, but mostly oh is So I realized how to cut through shit PAs is have lots of ooh sounds.
All right, I got one more for you then. The opening track of Discipline is Adrian basically doing talking and vocalizing and not really singing. So they address that shit right away. They're like, this guy's gonna recite some clever, some spiel here. It's not what's happening. It's not about melody right now. That's interesting.
Yeah, you see, it's difficult for me to comment on this because
you needn't.
It might come out negative, and I don't want it to.
I leave it to you. I wanted to present it to you as something that occurred to me in the last few years, having been around for that and remembering these little details, witnessing it. I'm just like, yeah, this is interesting. And if you look at the timeline, especially of the freedom, the liberation of drums into being patterns and not being white noise makers.
Yes, patterns in a more tribal kind of way.
Were you listening to world music at that point?
Only accidentally. It's kind of like, you'd blunder on things. I blundered onto the Burundi drummers. A friend of mine had the John Peel, I can't think what it was called, John Peel Archive or something, John Peel something. And it was lots of strange recordings of folk stuff from around the world. And he had that, I think he had that thing where there was a lot of miners from South Africa or somewhere in that neck of the woods. And they had like rubber Wellington boots on with bottle tops attached. And they were stamping on pallets, these stages made of pallets. And so when they were stamping with these boots, they had this big thump on the pallet and the jingle. And they were doing these kind of, and it's wonderful sound. I thought, why is that not in pop music? Because another idea of pop music was mine, is I wanted to capture the thrill of the fairground all the time. And to me, the thrill of the fairground was the music they'd play through the crappy PA systems, which was inevitably distorted. And it seemed to be 9 times out of 10, it seemed to be something by Johnny and the Hurricanes.
So what are I know you must have vivid memories of the fair music thing, because I know I do. My first one is, believe it or not, I heard Elegant People by Weather Report at a fair. That's such an indicator.
So wrong. That's so wrong.
It's like some guy was hip for some reason playing this at the fair. What did you hear?
No, I've spent most of my life chasing things like Red River Rock by Johnny and the Hurricanes or Rocking Goose. It's always distorted Farfisa organ, rattling, kind of twist beat drums, just the essence of 2 minutes of disposable thrill ride, because you're on this thrill ride, you think you're going to lose your stomach, lose your life.
Yeah.
You're trying to be cool in front of the girls in the other car, or the girls in the Big Dipper or whatever it is you're on. And you're hearing the soundtrack of that. And this has haunted me all the way through my songwriting career, is trying to capture that either in words. There's so many songs about fun fairs and fairgrounds and fairground rides and things, trying to capture that essence. But it's Johnny and the Hurricanes, very, very distorted.
That's incredible impact of an image. Yeah.
It's one of the fingerprint sounds in my brain that I've subconsciously and consciously chasing all my musical life.
On your visual situation, I'm really curious about the impact of comic books and science fiction as it leads up to your Powers project.
Okay, well, because I was a slow reader at school, I had to stay behind for special lessons. He's a bright kid, but for some reason he struggles with reading, And what would happen is I would be faced with a page of print, and I would panic. It used to physically scare me. I couldn't look at it. It was like the most horrific sight, like a terrible road accident or something. I couldn't look at a printed page, and the smaller the print, the more frightening it was. So I stayed behind in school and had special lessons, but I never really read a book. I used to love books that had pictures in, and I would just look at the pictures because I got all the information I needed about anything from pictures. I never read. I used to get, my parents said, well, if you're going to have a stupid comic, you know, a comedy comic, you got to have something sensible as well. So I elected to get this magazine called Look and Learn, which had all of Britain's best graphic designers would be drawing scenes from history and scientific stuff and just everything, you know, and every page was filled with illustrations. And I never read one article in all the years I got this, but I would disappear into the pictures. So comic books were massive for me. I got comic books, I never even read the stories in a lot of them. I would just go for the art, whether it was Carmine Infantino's long slung futuristic long lines in Flash and Adam Strange, whether it was Kirby where everything was made out of angry rock, foreshortened angry rock, and every woman looked like Roz Kirby, or whether it was Steve Ditko where it all looked like bondage art or something. And I didn't know at the time that he and Stanton worked opposite each other and would often ink each other's drawings. Stanton being Eric Stanton being this kind of bondage kind of latex rubber kind of art.
Early S&M stuff, yeah.
Yeah. And then the other end of the desk or over the desk from him is Steve Ditko drawing comic stuff. And they're getting bored and passing each other's pencil work, and they're inking each other's work, you know.
Commercial artists. Yeah.
You frequently can't tell who's done the inking on that. It says Steve Ditko here, but that could be Stanton. It says Stanton here, but that to me looks like Ditko, you know.
Yeah, Ditko for me.
I loved comic art. I really, because I could draw, I thought this is what I'm going to be when I grow up.
Yeah, you were early comic book drawing and your own visual thing. Well, who were the artists that you like besides the one you've just mentioned?
Oh my God. Well, I loved all the illustrators in Look and Learn for a start, including what I think was Britain's best sci-fi hardware artist. He wasn't so good at people. They all looked like androids when he drew them, but his command of chiaroscuro, his command of reflected light, and just the designs of the hardware were unearthly and untouchable in my mind. And that was an artist called Ron Turner. He did a lot of pulp covers. He did a lot of sci-fi pulp covers. He did a few comic strip things. There was a strip of the Daleks in the mid-60s, and he did the best stuff of that. Go and look at Ron Turner's covers. Ron Turner cover art is sci-fi cover art. It's fantastic. Just the way the light's shining from that space helmet, the design of that ray gun, the pipes, the tubes. It's like, come on, nobody's touched Ron Turner for.
I love the equipment. I've always loved the equipment. I want to know.
You're gonna have orgasms over Ron Turner.
I love the suits. Very important to me.
Oh man, Ron Turner. Check that out.
Headgear is very important to me.
Yeah. But another Ron Embleton, he did a lot of kids' books, worked for Look and Learn. Everyone looked like super made up, beautiful mannequin, but he had certain fetishes which he kept drawing and coming back to, like American and Canadian backwoodsmen in fringe jackets and muskets, and he was excellent at all that stuff. In terms of comic art, like DC, Marvel, people like that.
Yeah.
Wally Wood was enormous for me.
Sure.
Wally Wood drew the filthiest, sluttiest looking women in comics.
He tended to, didn't he?
He cannot be touched. They had the most come on, half asleep, sexy faces.
But they're working in a laboratory with chemicals.
Yeah, if you had to design that woman, you'd use Wally's drawings as the diagram to aim for. But his work for Mad was fantastic. Actually, mentioning Mad, also Mort Drucker.
Yeah.
Was his the way he portrayed, because he did those film and TV parodies, the way he portrayed the stars were identical. They really looked like those people. And I loved how he drew his signature. He did 3 straight lines going down with a circle, and that was Mort. So it was 3 lines and a circle. And I wanted to copy that. So I copied that for a while. I had a little diagram, which is partly why I found XTC, the name XTC, so thrilling. To me, it was a pictogram.
Right on. Yeah.
It's like Kanjikani or can't think of the word. Kanjikani? Is that correct?
Kanjikami.
Yeah, maybe that's right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Japanese and Chinese pictorial writing. Because to me, XTC looked like the sort of thing that people would say they'd have an encounter with a UFO, and they'd say, well, there was some markings on the side of it. Now, well, what did it look like? And they'd write XTC. It looked like that. and it was like a pictogram, you know? But it was it was science fiction shorthand for ecstasy. And it's the kind of shit that aliens would have on the side of their craft. And I thought, well, that's the name for us. It's a pictogram. It's instant ecstasy. It's the highest possible state you can achieve. And here's what you take to achieve it. Here's what you ingest to get that. And so we had to have that for a name. It was just too perfect because it looked like a picture.
Oh, it is. It fits in perfectly with your MO of everything else. MO, get it?
Yep. So, MO for Mort.
Yes.
Yeah. But so hang on, a few more comic artists. Sure. I liked Ditko a lot. I liked his obscure stuff. Mr. A was big for me. I mean, I really aggressively a bit too right wing, but I kind of found it sort of thrilling, and nobody died. And I also like it when he messed around with superhero, like Captain Atom, was it?
Yeah.
And Blue Beetle, you know, the kind of failures that I loved it. Heroic. Sorry, which one?
You know Speedball?
Speedball.
He's a later Marvel Ditko.
No, I don't know if I'm gonna have to check that out.
There's some interesting visuals on that. I mean, you're not reading for story on so much of this stuff, but I'm.
Oh, no. In some of them, I buy them and I wouldn't read the stories. I just would pore over every frame.
Yeah.
Of the imagery, and I used to make my own. If I liked a frame, I would paint my own giant version of that one frame. Because I twigged that there was this fellow in New York called Roy Lichtenstein doing it.
I was hoping you'd mention him.
Yeah, well, he was doing it, so I thought, well, I can't afford one of those, and I don't like the frames he's stolen, so I'm going to take the ones I like. So I took a Kirby one of Hulk. It's what's his name, Banner, having a ray zapped on him on this bed, and he's either becoming Hulk or becoming Banner again. And I really liked that, so I painted a giant version of it, and a few other frames. And lo and behold, my wife actually was Roy Lichtenstein's girlfriend and muse for 2 or 3 years, and has got hundreds of tales of Roy Lichtenstein.
Can I ask you now, what do you think of that stuff? Because he's appropriating Kirby, he's appropriating romance romance comics, and I feel like in that and Warhol, you must have some sort of take on that.
Yeah, well, it's it's an idea, and it's an idea that is not their idea.
Like Duchamp.
It's just been stolen from somebody and writ large.
But I mean, doesn't it go back to the ready-mades?
Yeah, but I thought that was the start of purely idea art. I mean, I think ready-mades at the time, the urinal with R. Mutt, is it?
Yeah.
Signed R. Mutt. I mean, that was great because that was exactly when art needed deflating. You know, that was the thumbtack at the point the big balloon of art just needed bursting. And that,
yeah, but that's a man, one man, and then you have this sort of factory machine of Warhol doing it.
sure, but it's the best thing that Warhol could have done is make you realize that there is art everywhere. That to me is Warhol's art, not his bean cans or his repetitive photos of stars or whatever. It's alerting you to there can be art absolutely everywhere. And to me, art is recognizing whether it's a puke stain on the pavement or somebody's scribbled on a wall. If it communicates to you in some way, there is an argument for that being art. But even if they've spent 50 years painting it with the finest quality oils and the largest canvas and the most photographic process, if it doesn't talk to something in your soul, it's not art. It's failed. The first hurdle of art is communicate. Communicate some essence from your soul. And like I say, you can look at a puke stain on the floor in the street. You think, wow, that's a great shape. Well, the way that that's been fried by the sun and somebody's dropped a cigarette box on one side of it. And it's suddenly you're thinking, that's great art, but it's all unintentional, but something is connected in your soul. And it's, but then, you know, you get like the Tracy Emins of this world who, oh, it's my unmade bed. Yeah, it's not speaking to my soul, Trace. You know, that half a shark is not speaking to my soul.
Well, I like that Zappa said it's a optional form of entertainment.
Yeah, it is. It's the best thing it can do is say to you, art is everywhere. The worst thing it does is say, hey, this is art.
Or anything can be art. Look, we don't care about this, now that's art. So, you know, and Zappa also called it the frame. The frame becomes super important in that exercise.
Yeah. Well, frequently I prefer frames to what's in them. You know, what a beautiful frame that is. No, just cut the picture out. The picture's distracting me.
Who were your favorite DC characters?
I really liked the really square stuff. I loved, actually, I didn't mention Will Eisner. Will Eisner's spirit is huge for me. That is so filmic. That's
Noir.
so, yeah. But I think, who is it that made the film of it a few years back?
Yeah, I've seen it. I don't remember.
What's his name? Mr. Black and White.
It was the guy from Sin City, right? Frank
Yeah.
Miller.
Yeah, I thought he ruined it, Frank Miller.
Yeah, I don't care for it, but I mean, it's a style. It's very stylish.
It was style over content.
Yeah. No, I didn't get anything. I didn't read it. I just looked at the pictures.
Yeah. Okay.
You know?
All right. But yeah, DC, I loved Carmine Infantino's futurism.
Mm.
And when I say futurism, when he would draw aliens with big gills like fish, God, that got me so excited. Or he would draw cities that were like these kind of these arguing parabolic shapes with steps cut into the parabolic curves. And like I say, when he drew Flash would be tiny at one end of the picture, and then the whole frame would be just a long streak of pink.
You're going to love Speedball, because Ditko came up with an answer to the showing of motion thing that I hadn't seen other, places. And it has a lot to do with that orb shape following him, and he's sort of moving. It's very cool. So yeah, the idea of motion.
You know the Muybridge route. You know what I mean by the Muybridge route? Like where it's lots of still photographs that they were all triggered off as stills by trip ropes. It's like, because Muybridge made a bet that horses' legs all left the ground. So he did that in the Victorian era. He did that series of photographs of animals and people.
To isolate, you mean?
Yeah. And then you run them all together and it's a movie, basically.
Yeah.
But did he go that route where I'm going to have to look at Speedball.
You'll have to see it. And also Gene Colan's.
Gene Colan, yeah. I liked his the fact that everything is filling. But certain people were untouchable at certain things. Nobody did an unshaven chin like Joe Kubert.
It is huge, yeah.
Let me see some more. I'm digging in there. Who was it I really loved? I know it's not DC, but who drew, and it's a different artist painted the front covers. They were painterly, but who drew Magnus Robot Fighter? Was it Ross? Somebody Ross?
I don't know. I'm trying to
with
think.
My brain today. But
yes, the DC sci-fi world, we're talking about Adam Strange and all some of the...
Oh yeah, Adam Strange. I wanted to be Adam Strange with his reverse Roman helmet crest, the white crest that came sort of up and then it flared out of the back, yeah. And he went off to Alana in Ran. Oh man, he had to be there with was it the Zeta ray or something would hit him. I loved all that shit.
Yeah,
totally. That was Carmine Infantino again. So who else did I like? I liked Mike Sikowski. Mike Sikowski's pointy feet. He did. Everyone had their legs just came to a point, and it was his way of integrating. I don't know whether he was shit at drawing feet or whether he just wanted everyone to have these little balletic point feet. But I loved Mike Sikowski's pointy feet. And who was the fella that did Metal Men? I thought they were great.
Gil Kane?
No, Gil Kane was Green Lantern.
Green Arrow.
And Atom.
Atom, yeah.
Yeah.
I loved his noses. He always had the same nose for everybody.
I know what you mean.
If you see a picture of him, it's his nose.
His nose, yeah. But it's like Plastic Man is Jack Cole's face, isn't it?
Yes. Well, these things shouldn't surprise us. I mean, how many characters look like Kirby or his?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Kirby writ himself large. That pugnacious, angry rock formation. He was Ben Grimm.
Oh, absolutely. And a friend of mine who drew Superman for a while for DC said, I hate when people complain about the size of Kirby's hands. They're used for punching.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not just hands, they're fists.
Totally. No, Kirby was my standout American comic artist. And I have to make the distinction because we had nothing like that in Britain.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But everything he touched, I loved it. I loved Commandy. I loved Mr. Miracle, who was basically pretty lame, an escapologist. Come on. I loved OMAC. I loved all that kind of monster stuff he did. Was Fin Fan Foom and Ulik and all these kind of one-off sort of monster story things. Loved all that. Fighting American. Come on. I've got a combined all the Fighting American reprints. Yes, let me look. Hold him still. Hold him still. Oh, yeah. He's a bit muscly, but that's Fighting American.
And it's also very, pretty close. But yeah, he's much more muscular, obviously.
Yeah, I'm ashamed that I can't remember Fighting American's sidekick.
Oh, yeah. I'm terrible with that. I was going to say Speedy, and of course it's not that.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's Fighting American. Obviously, the agenda was the Filthy Reds. Like all the enemies are psychedelic commies, basically.
And he had already done Cap doing the Nazis. So
yeah, so okay, who's this week's villain? Who's the approved villain this week? Oh, okay, it's the commies.
The thing about you mentioned you knew about my Requiem for Jack Kirby album. The thing that the way that it all came together was unbelievable, because at that time in 2000, 2001, nobody really cared about Jack Kirby apart from the aficionados like yourself. And it was a fight to get people more aware of his work in terms of its reach, and it had reached into the avant-garde of music. So I was the person that said, you know what, let's do this. And I met a guy at a party in LA who was drawing Superman, my friend Duncan Rollo. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm working on this music dedicated to Jack Kirby. And he said, anything I can do. And he connected me to Stan Lee, Jim Steranko, Mark Evanier, who was Kirby's assistant.
Yeah, it's Steranko. Sorry, you've just hit another name there. His Shield, Steranko's Shield, I loved it. That was just mod art written crazy.
Yes, it is the moment of that art. It is that art of that time. It's incredible. You're right.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. Carry on.
So and Jim's a good friend, and he was super helpful to me in that project. And these guys all did everything for free. They wrote a liner note for me. DC president of DC said, yeah, $200, you can license everything. Send me faxes of the pages you want. So it really just fell together, and we toured that. It got huge press for being so weird that a jazz guy would admit to being into comic books. And Andy, I'll show you some of this stuff. All of the jazz critics were comic book people that came out of the closet for this record.
Ah,
it was so consistent.
There are other crossover areas with that. People like Gene Deitch. Do you know Gene Deitch's work? Gene, Gened. I've got to get the spelling correct.
All right.
It's up there somewhere. Shit, where is it? Gene Deitch, Deitch, I think.
Yeah.
He had a really agitated kind of beatnik style of drawing, a bit like Jim Flora. You know Jim Flora?
Yes.
Gene Deitch, Jim Flora could have been brothers from the same mother. But some years ago I bought a kind of a book all about Gene Deitch. I loved his artwork, and everything looked sort of crazy and scratchy and beatnik. And sorry, I don't know how we got onto this, but there's a kind of comic art and an illustrator that was big into the jazz thing as well.
Yes, and of course Harvey Pekar was a huge jazz critic. In fact, he reviewed the Kirby Requiem. I was hoping I made sure I sent it to him personally, I think.
And tell me, Greg, how did you? Because you're not drumming on that album, are you?
I'm playing vibes and Glock on that.
Was that a color, a palette choice for you, or was it a?
That group Interzone existed for 2 albums before that, but the first album is acoustic bass, the second album is electric bass, and then I went back to acoustic bass, but it was always with the Cline brothers, Nels on guitar and Alex on drums. I was classically trained as a percussionist, and I thought vibraphone was really cool in jazz. It would allow me to play melody instead of just being a drummer. So I always kept at it. And when I wanted to finally pull the trigger and do a band where I was going to really play vibes, I needed a drummer that I would love. And it was Alex pretty much immediately. And when I started that band, it was also predicated by the Gary Burton quartets with guitar. Those are super important. You know, anybody that was trying to do something a little bit different with that grouping. And I also like the idea of a 4-color comic and a 4-piece group going at it with sort of those as a limitation to make a universe. So that album for me was about like a lot of variety, big stuff, really small stuff, scale, you know, different images for each song, different references to how the comics affected me in my childhood and in my conception of like different cities, different worlds, you know, the cityscape. And so it was really that. It was push the quartet to be as orchestral as possible. We were always sort of half between jazz and chamber and rock. It was sort of like those 3 areas are my areas. And so when we did it, it was always, there's going to be a lot of improv. We could change the set all the time. We can stretch on certain sections and not stretch on others, and very compositional. But when I started doing the Kirby, the thing just took on a life of its own. And I thought, yes, it should be a New York, LA, you know, quartet, you know, hard scrabble little jazz quartet that's going to make a statement about a great man.
Well, to me, there are 2 New York artists, and one is Will Eisner and one's Jack Kirby. So everything they drew was the kind of the essence of New York down to the purest form, you know.
Did you find a physical copy of the album I'm referring to? Because I can send you one if you've never.
No, I'd love one. I've only heard it online, I'm ashamed to say.
Well, it opens up into a fold-out poster.
Oh, man. Oh, now, I had a Marvel album in the early 70s.
Yeah.
Spider-Man.
Yes.
Do you own this thing?
Yes.
You have it?
Yeah. I have it on CD, so I can, it's actually transferred.
Oh, who's the villain in it?
Kingpin?
Kingpin. I think it is. He's got a big, I think several villains. I'm trying to remember it. Do several villains get roped in? And
yes, because there's a dream sequence where he's being attached by the Sinister Six. He's being attacked. But at the end, you know who takes out Kingpin?
So long since I've had that album.
I'm just remembering it now. Doctor Strange pulls some supernatural stuff. And at the end, the quote that sticks to me to this moment is, "The Kingpin has been swallowed by an illusion." That's it.
Well, if I had I've got a pair of bongos, but they're down in my shed. If I had a pair of bongos now, I could do a few taps, because that's the sort of thing wow, I'm being swallowed by an illusion, Daddy-O.
So right. And it was like, we just loved it. I love Dr. Strange.
I mean, bless you for playing vibes, because that's one of my favorite instruments. And my all-time favorite guitar player, Ollie Helsel, was also a vibes player.
Yes, he was.
You know, you hear the couple of Pato albums.
Yes, I have them.
Oh, wonderful. There's that lovely little placid solo he does on the opening track of the first album, The Man. And he does that little, it's just.
Do you remember Gong?
Yes.
That was another group that later had vibes and percussion, tune percussion. Anybody that had tune percussion I loved, or percussion. Jamie Muir on Lark's Tongues and Aspic, all that while percussion was important. Anybody?
For me, it was the double whammy, because vibes just put me in a dream straight away.
Yeah.
Plus, his guitar playing was unlike anything I'd ever heard. You know, he never played conventional runs and scales. He played things that were, you know, other guitarists just stuck in the blues box, and he could do that until the cows come home. But then he'd break out and play all this tonal stuff, and you know, it really reached up into a space that I'd only heard saxophonists and a few great jazz pianists get into that area.
And he had a big influence on Holdsworth.
Absolutely. I'm a latecomer to Holdsworth. I never, in fact, I got to see him live in the 70s, not knowing who he was. And it was a terrible gig. It was extremely late at night. I was drunk, and somebody said, "Do you want to come to a new thing called the Virgin Venue?" And I, sure, yeah, why not? Do they sell? They got a bar there? Yeah, there's a bar. Okay, great, I'll go. And it was nobody was interested in what he was playing, and it was a little bit sad, really. It just didn't click with anyone, and it didn't even click with me. I just wasn't. I was more interested in being drunk, I think, at that point.
Well, how did you feel about the Jack Bruce couple records there, Songs for a Tailor and Harmony Row? Were those important?
Fantastic, fantastic. One of my all-time favorite tracks is "Rope Ladder to the Moon."
Yeah,
and that you can hear that in coming out in things like 1,000 Umbrellas. You know, the just the, I don't know if I'm starting in the right key, but you know, that's almost like "Rope Ladder to the Moon" in reverse. Rope, rope, ladder, you know, that semitone climbing stuff. That, and As You Said, are my two favorite Jack Bruce numbers because they live in that area between, you know what I mean?
he's so fascinating to me. I was lucky enough to produce his first posthumous album, which was a live album at the Bottom Line in New York for 80 Band, which was Sanchez, him, Clem Clemson, and Cobham. And he's interesting because he is so all over the place musically. He's so diverse that if people really only checked him out with Cream, they would have no idea how musical he was.
Sure, yeah. You know, I've played stuff from the solo albums to people who liked Cream, and I say, "What do you think of this number?" And they say, "Oh, it's pretty good. Who's that?" And I'd say, "Well, that's the bass player of the band you really rave about. That's Jack Bruce from Cream."
Who's singing on a lot of that shit you really rave about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, he was the powerhouse behind Cream. I didn't go for Clapton's playing.
Yeah.
I just thought, you know, once you're exposed to the wilder shores of jazz, to come back to that blues box over and over and over and over is a bit soul destroying.
No, I can't go back to the blues stuff. It's been really hard.
Yeah, the only way that works is if you're unbearably minimal with it, and it's just one or two chosen. But it's also vanilla now. I can't hear it.
How about Jack Bruce and Tony Williams' Lifetime?
Now, as much as I love Jack Bruce, and as much as I love Tony Williams' Lifetime, I did think that the pairing of them for, was it called Turn It On, Turn It Over, Turn It Up? Turn It Over. I did think that pairing was a steak and ice cream moment. It didn't work. It was two flavors that did not complement each other. And to me, what I liked about the Emergency album is the unusual sound of Larry Young's feet on the pedals of the Hammond.
Right. That's huge.
The fact that, you know, the stuff he's playing on top sounds like, I always thought it was somebody trying to, a flying saucer had landed somewhere and an alien's got out in a field and getting a spanner under the engine and he's trying to get this saucer working again. That sounded like Larry Young's organ playing, the Hammond, his hands, it's all, and then he's with his feet. Yeah. And McLaughlin's inventing the Mahavishnu thing while he's wrestling with a faulty wah-wah pedal.
Did you ever hear that they did a vocal version with Jack Bruce on the melody of Dance of Maya before Mahavishnu?
No.
Oh, I'll send it to you.
Oh, yes.
It's crazy.
But, you know, sometimes great players, sometimes the chemistry isn't right. I mean, Trio of Doom.
Terrible.
Exactly. But the three of the people that comprise the Trio of Doom, faultless. and a combination of two of them, very faultless, but the three of them, it's not working,
Well, and also was one member working against it at that point too.
Yeah.
Because one was a mess. But yeah, I guess. I also don't think that anyone should assume supergroups are going to be of any value to anyone.
No, I mean, blind faith kind of pointless to me.
Yeah, it's okay, but I don't know.
You know, I got to be Ursat's Kirby a couple of times with the Helium Kids and XTC. We had some promo posters where I got to draw some. I got to be a comic artist momentarily. I think you can find them online somewhere. But the thing you won't find online was the Helium Kids / XTC group van, the truck. You know, on the back of it, I painted. With Humbrol hobby paints, I painted this Kirby-esque winged, looked like it was made out of rock, of course, but it was winged and menacing, looking out, and it was on the back doors of the group van. So yeah, I got to live a little fantasy there.
That's super fun. Yeah, I'm always happy to see that kind of stuff being quoted, as it will.
Yeah, I don't know where that is now. Probably got, the whole thing was scrapped. The whole truck was scrapped somewhere, and hopefully someone's got the doors hanging on their wall.